The morning of my son's graduation, the house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't rest, it lingers, heavy, like something left unsaid. I sat on the old couch in my living room, the same one that still smelled faintly of lavender and sewing thread, and stared at the TV screen. The live stream had just started. The camera panned across proud faces, flashing smiles, people holding flowers. I held mine too, a small bouquet of white lilies, his favorite since he was little. The hum of the TV filled the air, mixing with the ticking of the clock. Outside, the sky was gray, the kind of dull morning that never quite wakes up. I pressed the bouquet closer to my chest, petals trembling in my hands. Then, as the announcer welcomed the parents, I heard his voice echo in my mind, sharp, cold, unforgettable. "Stay home, Mom. You'll embarrass me." The words had landed the night before, soft as a whisper, but heavy as a hammer. He said them like it was nothing, just a passing comment before hanging up. I remember sitting there, frozen, phone still in my hand, trying to understand how a son I raised with everything I had could look at me and see shame. My throat tightened as the camera zoomed in on the stage. There he was, my Benjamin, tall, handsome, wearing the navy gown I once dreamed of seeing him in. The crowd clapped. My heart didn't. I just sat there, watching my own child smile for everyone but me. A breeze slipped through the half-open window, brushing my face, but it did nothing to cool the heat in my chest. It wasn't anger. No, anger would have been easier. It was something deeper, hollow, like a part of me had cracked. I thought of the years behind that smile, late nights at the sewing machine, the smell of fabric glue, the way he used to curl beside me when thunderstorms scared him. The camera caught him hugging another woman, a tall, elegant lady in beige. His mother-in-law. She was beaming as if she had raised him herself. I looked down at my hands, at the tiny scars from years of stitching clothes, and for the first time in a long while, they felt ugly. My eyes blurred. The applause through the speakers sounded distant, almost mocking. I whispered to myself, half a sob, half a confession. Those words still echo louder than the applause he got that day. For a moment, I wanted to turn off the TV, to stop watching, to stop feeling. But I couldn't. Because mothers never stop watching. Even when the world tells them not to show up. If you've ever loved someone who forgot your worth, you'll understand what comes next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this. Real stories of love, pain, and strength. Now, let me tell you what really happened. I was only 34 when life handed me widowhood. One reckless driver, one rainy night, and Richard, my husband, my best friend, was gone. What remained was a small apartment, a sewing machine that coughed more than it stitched, and a 7-year-old boy who asked why Daddy didn't come home. Benjamin became my purpose. Every day after that was built around him. I woke before dawn to sew school uniforms for the neighborhood children. The sound of the machine filling the house like a heartbeat. My fingers would ache, my back would burn, but when Benjamin's laughter echoed down the hallway, it all felt worth it. We didn't have much, but I made sure he never felt the lack. His lunches were always warm, his clothes neatly pressed, and his birthdays filled with homemade cakes shaped like soccer balls. I couldn't buy him the best toys, but I gave him time, attention, and faith. That, I believed, would be enough to raise a good man. As he grew, so did his dreams. He wanted to study business, to wear suits like the men on TV. I still remember the day the university acceptance letter arrived. He ran into the house shouting, "Mom, I got in." We both cried, him from excitement, me from pride and fear. I knew what it meant. Years of bills I couldn't afford, long nights working extra shifts, but I said yes anyway. I picked up every sewing job I could find. Curtains, tablecloths, wedding gowns. The neighbors would say, "Lori, you're working yourself to death." I'd smile and reply, "A mother's love doesn't clock out." When tuition deadlines came, I sold Richard's old watch, the one he promised Benjamin could inherit one day. I told myself he'd understand. Every phone call from Benjamin during those years was gold to me. He'd say, "Mom, I aced my exam," or, "Mom, we won our intramural finals." I'd sit by the phone smiling like a fool, as if his words alone could light up the room. I pictured him in lecture halls, confident and charming, a man stepping into the world I never got to know. The first time I visited his dorm, I brought homemade beef stew. His friends were polite, but I saw how they looked at my patched handbag, my faded shoes. Benjamin introduced me quickly, his smile tight. I brushed it off. College kids could be awkward. But the seed of distance had already been planted. After graduation, he got a job at a big firm downtown. The first in our family to wear a tie to work. I couldn't stop bragging. My Benjamin works in an office now. I'd tell customers as I measured hems. The pride in my voice made the long nights worth it. Then about a year later he met Brenda. She was polite the first time we spoke, smiling, well-dressed, soft-spoken. Her family came from money. Her mother, Mrs. Harper, owned several boutiques. I remember feeling nervous before meeting them, sewing a new blouse for myself and ironing it twice. Dinner was elegant but uncomfortable. Mrs. Harper had that effortless grace that comes with money, the kind that makes you feel like an uninvited guest in your own story. She asked what I did for a living. When I told her I was a seamstress, she gave me a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How wonderful," she said. "My mother used to sew, back when it was still a hobby." I laughed it off, pretending not to notice the sting. Benjamin seemed oblivious, talking animatedly about his job. But when the waiter asked if I wanted wine and I declined, Mrs. Harper smiled and said, "Of course not, some people just prefer simpler tastes." That night, I rode the bus home, hands folded on my lap, pretending I hadn't noticed the difference between our worlds. I told myself love could bridge it. After all, Benjamin was raised on respect. He'd never let pride come between us. But slowly the distance grew. He started visiting less, always too busy. When I called, he'd answer but sound distracted. I sent him photos of dresses I was working on. He stopped replying. Once, I surprised him at his office with lunch, only to have his assistant say he was in a meeting. Later he texted, "Mom, don't do that again, okay? It's not professional." I didn't argue. I told myself he was just growing up, that he needed space. I kept sewing, kept saving. Every month I put aside a few dollars for something special. A new suit for his graduation ceremony. That was the day I was waiting for. The day when all the sleepless nights and callous fingers would finally mean something. When the university sent the invitation, I pinned it to my wall above the sewing table. "We made it," I whispered. I started planning what to wear. A simple navy blue dress with embroidery along the neckline. I hand-stitched every petal, every swirl. It wasn't fancy, but it was made with pride. Sometimes, when I got tired, I'd sit by the window and think back to the little boy who once said, "Mom, when I graduate, I'll take you on stage with me." The memory warmed me then. I didn't know that same promise would one day become a wound that would take years to heal. For 28 years, I ironed uniforms, packed lunches, and worked late just to see him graduate. That day was supposed to be ours. It started subtly, the way frost creeps across a window pane. You don't notice it until everything feels cold. After that first dinner with Brenda's family, things began to shift. Benjamin still called, but his tone changed. He spoke faster, less tender, as though he were always in a rush to hang up. When he finally brought Brenda to visit, she arrived with that effortless glow of youth and privilege, polished nails, designer coat, and a perfume that lingered in every corner long after she left. I liked her at first. She smiled sweetly, thanked me for the meal, even complimented my curtains. "You made these yourself? That's adorable." She said it kindly, but the word adorable hung in the air like a faint insult. Her mother, Mrs. Harper, followed soon after. She stopped by one Sunday with Brenda and Benjamin, holding a box of imported chocolates. "A little something for you," she said, her eyes gliding across my small living room. I offered coffee, but she waved it off, murmuring, "Oh no, dear. Too strong for my taste." While Benjamin talked about work, Mrs. Harper ran her fingers along the edge of the tablecloth I'd stitched years ago. "Such craftsmanship," she said, smiling. "You must have plenty of time for hobbies." I wanted to correct her, that this wasn't a hobby, it was my livelihood, but I just smiled and said, "Yes, I keep myself busy." The moment that truly stayed with me happened as they were leaving. Brenda turned to Benjamin and asked him to take a quick photo. He wrapped his arm around her and her mother, all smiles. Then Mrs. Harper gestured toward me. "Let's have one with your mother too," she said lightly. I stepped closer, but Brenda hesitated just slightly, barely noticeable, but enough. Maybe another time, she said. We're late for dinner reservations. It was such a small thing. Yet that night, as I sat by the sewing machine, the hum of the needle couldn't drown out the echo of that pause. Weeks turned into months. Benjamin started dressing differently, tailored suits, shiny shoes, a wristwatch that looked expensive enough to pay my rent. When I asked about it, he said, "Mrs. Harper helped me choose them. She says I need to look the part if I want to move up." I tried to smile. "You always looked perfect to me, son." He laughed gently. "That's because you're my mom." The laughter didn't reach his eyes. Soon he was spending weekends at Brenda's family home, a sprawling estate with marble floors and glass chandeliers. When I called on Sundays, his voice was distant, distracted. "Mom, can I call you later? We're having dinner." Later rarely came. I noticed other changes too. He stopped asking about my work, stopped mentioning coming by for meals. Once, I sent him a photo of a new dress I'd designed, thinking he'd be proud. He replied hours later. "Looks great, Mom, but maybe you should focus on rest instead of work. You've done enough." Done enough. The words sounded kind, but I heard what they hid: embarrassment. When Brenda's birthday came, I offered to make her a custom gown as a gift. Benjamin smiled awkwardly. "Mom, that's sweet, but Brenda only wears certain brands. I'll just buy her something." His voice was polite yet final. I nodded and said nothing, but my chest felt hollow. A month later, Brenda and Mrs. Harper invited me again, this time for dinner at a high-end restaurant downtown. I saved for a week to afford a taxi and wore my best navy blue dress, the same one I'd planned for Benjamin's graduation one day. When I arrived, the hostess led me to their table. Long white linens, soft lighting, crystal glasses. Brenda waved me over. "Mom, over here." She called me Mom for the first time. I wanted to believe it meant something. But then came the subtle jabs, each wrapped in silk. Mrs. Harper asked, "So Lori's still sewing away?" "Yes," I said proudly. "It's been my passion since I was a girl." "How wonderful," she replied, tilting her head. "Still, I suppose business is tough these days. With all the cheap imports, how do you manage?" Benjamin chuckled nervously, sipping his wine. I forced a smile. "I manage fine," Brenda added. "You must be so creative though. I could never spend all day sewing. My patience would run out after an hour." They all laughed lightly, and I laughed too, though it sounded hollow. After dinner, Mrs. Harper insisted on paying. "Please, it's our treat. You've done enough already, raising such a fine young man." Her words were sweet, but her smile carried pity. On the taxi ride home, I stared out the window, lights blurring into streaks of gold. For the first time, I wondered if Benjamin was ashamed of me. The answer came soon enough. He began avoiding family gatherings, saying Brenda's family had plans. When I called to ask if he'd visit for Easter, he sighed. "Mom, Brenda's parents invited us to their lake house. You'd love it. It's so peaceful. Maybe next time, okay?" "Of course," I said, my voice trembling. "Next time." The truth settled in quietly. My world, built around love and simplicity, no longer fit in the one he was building. His laughter, his posture, even his words began to sound like someone else's. One afternoon, while hemming a dress, I pricked my finger on the needle and whispered, "When did I become a stranger to my own son?" A single drop of blood fell onto the fabric, leaving a tiny mark. I stared at it for a long time, then folded the cloth carefully away. I didn't know it then, but that was the first scar of a deeper wound, the kind no amount of stitching could ever mend. The morning of the graduation arrived like a memory I'd been chasing for years. I woke before dawn, the air still cool, sunlight just beginning to stretch across the curtains. My hands trembled as I laid out my navy blue dress, the one I had spent weeks hand-stitching, the same dress I planned to wear when I finally watched my son walk across that stage. I took my time getting ready, as if I were preparing for a ceremony of my own. My hair silver and thin, I pinned into a neat bun. I dabbed on a touch of lavender perfume. The same scent Benjamin once said reminded him of home. I packed a small bouquet of lilies into a paper wrap, tied with a satin ribbon. Those were his favorite flowers when he was a child. I imagined the moment he would spot me in the crowd, how his face would light up. At 7 that morning, I texted him. On my way, sweetheart. Do I need to show the invitation at the gate? Minutes turned into half an hour. No reply. I smiled to myself, convincing my heart he was probably busy with last-minute preparations. I slipped my shoes on and checked my reflection one last time. Then, as I reached for my purse, the phone buzzed. His name flashed on the screen. For a moment, relief washed over me. Until I read the message. Mom, please don't come. Brenda's parents arranged special seats and media coverage. It might be awkward if you're there. I'll make it up to you, I promise. I froze, staring at the words. My first thought was that he'd sent it to the wrong person. Then came the sting, the kind that doesn't fade with time. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed, bouquet still in hand, petals trembling as if they could feel my pulse. Awkward. That's what I was to him now. The clock ticked louder than usual. I read the message again and again, hoping I had misunderstood. He didn't call, didn't explain, just silence. I typed and deleted replies. Why, son? I bought you flowers. Please let me come. In the end, I wrote nothing. At 10 o'clock, the ceremony began. The TV flickered to life, filling my small living room with colors and cheers. I sat on the couch, the bouquet resting across my lap. The announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. Welcome to the 2025 commencement ceremony. The camera panned over smiling faces, families clapping, mothers wiping away proud tears. I smiled too, though my own tears burned. And then I saw him, my Benjamin, walking across the stage, his gown perfectly pressed, his expression calm and confident. I leaned forward instinctively, whispering, "That's my boy." But then I noticed her beside him, Mrs. Harper. She held his arm, graceful and composed, waving at the cameras as though he were her son. Brenda stood nearby, her smile dazzling, her hand clutching her mother's. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that maybe she was guiding him for a photo, that he would turn and look for me somewhere in the crowd. But when the announcer said, "And now," accompanied by his mother-in-law, Benjamin Harper, the breath left my body. Not Carter. Harper. The lilies slipped from my lap onto the floor. The sound of applause filled the room, loud, hollow, endless. I couldn't hear the words anymore, only the rush of blood in my ears. The boy I raised alone, the one I had sacrificed everything for, had chosen someone else to stand beside him on the day I'd waited for my entire life. I turned off the TV and sat in silence. Even the air felt ashamed to move. I thought about all the nights I stayed up sewing, the lunches packed, the uniforms pressed, the dreams whispered to sleep. They all seemed to vanish into that single moment, replaced by one sentence that would never stop echoing. "Stay home, Mom. You'll embarrass me." I stared at the lilies on the floor, white petals against old carpet, and realized how fitting it was. Beauty and pain, side by side, both fragile and fading. When the phone finally buzzed again, it wasn't Benjamin. It was a neighbor sending a photo from the local news. "Your son looks so handsome. You must be so proud." I smiled weakly, typed back, "I am," and turned the phone face down. Outside, children laughed on the street. Life continued, indifferent. I stood slowly, placed the bouquet into a vase and whispered, "You still deserve flowers, Benjamin." Then I sank into the quiet that filled every corner of the room. I wanted to hate him. I couldn't. The love of a mother doesn't vanish. It only bruises, deep and invisible. That day, I didn't cry. I simply sat, still and hollow, until the light outside faded. The world celebrated his success. I mourned something no one else could see. The death of a bond one thought unbreakable. That night, as the moon rose and the city lights blinked through my window, I finally let the truth settle. The son I once knew had grown into a man who no longer saw me. And all I could do was sit there, in the dim glow of the television, clutching the wilted lilies that once meant love, and now meant goodbye. A week passed after the graduation, each day blurring into the next. The bouquet of lilies had wilted on the table, but I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Every time I looked at them, I told myself maybe he'd call. Maybe he'd say he was sorry. But the phone stayed silent. I kept busy at the sewing table, pretending work could patch what was broken inside me. Threads tangled, needles slipped, my hands, once steady, had forgotten their rhythm. I was halfway through hemming a client's dress when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, warm but formal. "Mrs. Carter?" "Yes, speaking." "This is Dean Richards from the University Community Program. You may not remember me, but your volunteer work has supported our sewing outreach for over a decade. We'd like to honor you at the upcoming Community Impact Awards." For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. "Honor me? Are you sure you have the right person?" He chuckled. "We're very sure. You've trained dozens of women, raised funds, repaired countless uniforms for our youth program. Your dedication deserves recognition." Recognition. A word I hadn't heard in a long time. My throat tightened. I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll attend," he replied. "You'll receive your invitation by mail tomorrow. It's an important event. We'd be honored to have you." When the call ended, I sat in silence, the hum of the sewing machine fading into the background. For the first time in days, I felt something stir inside me that wasn't pain. It was disbelief wrapped in quiet gratitude. The next afternoon, the letter arrived. A cream-colored envelope embossed with the university seal. My name written neatly in dark blue ink. "Mrs. Lori Carter, honoree." I ran my fingers over the words, almost afraid they would disappear. That night, I read the letter over and over, then pressed it to my chest. The same institution where my son had felt ashamed of me was now recognizing the very work he once dismissed as old-fashioned. Life, it seemed, had its own sense of timing. Still, I hesitated. What if he was there? What if Brenda's family attended? What if I stood on that stage and became the embarrassment he'd always feared? The thought made my stomach knot. The following morning, I confided in my neighbor Grace, a retired teacher who'd become like a sister to me. She listened quietly as I told her everything, from the message Benjamin sent to the call from the dean. When I finished, she leaned forward and took my hand. "Lori," she said softly, "you've spent your whole life giving without expecting applause. Maybe it's time you let the world see the woman you really are." "But what if he sees me there?" I whispered. "What if it humiliates him?" She smiled sadly. "Then maybe that's the lesson he needs." Her words echoed long after she left. That night, I opened the closet and looked at my dress, the navy blue one I had meant to wear for his graduation. It hung there quietly, as if waiting for its purpose. I decided to wear it again, but this time, not as a mother seeking approval. This time, as a woman reclaiming her dignity. Over the next week, I returned to my sewing work, but something inside me had changed. My movements were calmer, my thoughts clearer. Each stitch felt like an act of healing. For years, I'd stitched for survival, for others. Now I was stitching myself back together. The day before the ceremony, I received another call from the university, confirming the schedule. The dean mentioned that several local businesses and alumni families would be present, including prominent donors. "It'll be a lovely event," he said. "You'll be in good company." I thanked him politely, then froze as his words echoed. Prominent donors. Brenda's family owned 3 boutiques that sponsored events for the university. Of course they would be there. Fate, it seemed, had arranged its own confrontation. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker like restless thoughts. I whispered to the stars, "If this is how life wants to teach him, then let it be gentle." The next morning, I woke before dawn. My reflection in the mirror looked different. Older, yes, but stronger too. I brushed my hair, pinned it neatly, and slipped into the same navy blue dress. I added a touch of lavender perfume, the scent that once gave me courage. Then I placed the cream envelope into my purse. Before leaving, I stopped by the table where the lilies once stood. Only brittle stems remained, their fragrance long gone. I replaced them with a fresh bouquet, white and full. Not for Benjamin this time, but for myself, a quiet symbol of survival. When I stepped outside, the air was crisp, the sky painted gold with sunrise. The city hummed with life, unaware of the small miracle unfolding. For years, I'd watched my son chase success, believing worth could be measured by status and applause. But that morning, As I walked toward the bus stop with the envelope pressed to my heart, I understood something deeper. Sometimes the world doesn't need to change for you to be seen. You just need to show up, even when you've been told to stay home. I didn't know exactly what awaited me at that ceremony, only that it would be more than an award. It would be a moment of truth, for him, for me, and for every mother who has ever been told she wasn't enough. And deep down I knew the lesson life was about to teach wouldn't belong to me alone. The ceremony was held in the same auditorium where Benjamin's graduation had taken place only a week earlier. Walking through those glass doors again felt like stepping back into a wound I hadn't fully healed from. But this time, I didn't come as someone's forgotten guest. I came as someone who had earned her place. The building hummed with polite chatter and the rustle of elegant fabrics. My navy blue dress, though simple, seemed to carry its own quiet grace. The scent of lavender trailed behind me as I found a seat near the middle of the hall. I clutched the cream-colored envelope that had brought me here, the embossed seal pressing lightly against my palm. As I looked around, my heart stopped for a moment. 2 rows ahead sat Brenda and Mrs. Harper, both radiant in expensive silks. Benjamin sat between them, scrolling on his phone. My breath caught. Of all the events in the city, it had to be this one. For a moment, doubt rushed back in. The urge to hide, to slip away unnoticed. But then I remembered Grace's words. Maybe that's the lesson he needs. So I stayed. The ceremony began. The dean spoke of community, resilience, and the quiet heroes who built change without asking for recognition. His words washed over the crowd, but each one seemed to land directly on me. He continued. Every year we honor individuals whose hands have built bridges, not of stone, but of compassion. The audience clapped politely. Then the big screen behind him flickered to life. Photos filled the screen, smiling women at sewing machines, rows of children wearing handmade uniforms, community projects bearing familiar stitching patterns. My stitching patterns. The dean's voice grew clearer. Today we honor Mrs. Lori Carter, a woman whose humble hands have empowered more than 200 women to earn a living with dignity. Her work has inspired our youth programs and given countless families a second chance. The hall fell quiet. Benjamin lifted his head. Brenda's hand froze mid-applause. Mrs. Harper blinked rapidly, her poise slipping for the first time. I sat still, too stunned to move. My name echoed across the auditorium. Mrs. Carter, would you please join us on stage? The spotlight found me. I could feel hundreds of eyes turning in my direction. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I stood, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand, and began to walk down the aisle. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because I could feel the weight of every year I'd spent believing I wasn't enough. The crowd began to applaud, slow at first, then stronger, until the sound filled the hall. As I reached the stage, the dean smiled and extended his hand. We are proud to have you with us, Mrs. Carter. The applause rose to a standing ovation. I turned slightly, and there he was, Benjamin, frozen in disbelief, his mouth slightly open. For a moment, our eyes met. I saw confusion, then realization, and finally shame. Mrs. Harper looked down, pretending to fix her bracelet. Brenda fidgeted with her phone. The dean handed me a plaque engraved with gold lettering. For outstanding service in community empowerment, University of Maryland. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Only calm. Deep anchored calm. When he asked if I'd like to say a few words, I hesitated, then stepped up to the microphone. My voice trembled, but it held steady. I've spent most of my life behind a sewing machine. I began softly. People often think of sewing as small work. But when you stitch something with love, whether it's a piece of fabric or a broken life, you're creating strength thread by thread. The audience was silent. I glanced at Benjamin again. His head was bowed, his hands clasped together. I used to believe that value came from what others thought of us, I continued. But today, I've learned that true worth doesn't need applause. It lives quietly, in the things we give and the people we help rise. I paused. My voice softened further. So, to every woman who's ever been told she isn't enough, remember, sometimes the smallest stitches hold the strongest seams. The hall erupted in applause again, but I barely heard it. I stepped back, clutching the plaque to my chest. As I left the stage, the dean whispered, "You've just reminded this room what success really looks like." I smiled, but my heart was elsewhere, with my son. As I returned to my seat, Benjamin stood up. For a moment, I thought he might walk away. Instead, he began to clap. Slow, hesitant at first, then steady. The sound of his hands echoed louder than the rest. Mrs. Harper remained still, her lips pressed thin. Brenda's eyes darted between us, unsure what to do. The applause faded. I sat down quietly, every emotion rushing through me at once. Pride, grief, vindication, love. The kind of love that survives even when it shouldn't. When the ceremony ended, people came to congratulate me. Professors, students, strangers. Cameras flashed. I smiled politely, but my mind was fixed on one thing. The look on Benjamin's face when he realized who I truly was. Outside the auditorium, the sunlight spilled across the steps. I stood for a moment, letting it warm my face. That same light fell on Benjamin as he approached slowly, alone. His expression was unreadable, part shame, part awe. He stopped a few feet away. "Mom," he said quietly, voice trembling, "I didn't know." I smiled faintly. "You weren't supposed to. You were supposed to find out today." He swallowed hard, glancing down at the plaque in my hands. "You never told me any of this." I met his gaze. "You never asked." For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. We stood there in silence, the crowd dispersing around us, until he finally whispered, "You looked incredible up there." I reached out and touched his arm gently. That's because I finally stood where I belonged. The air between us felt different. Not fully healed, but no longer hollow. As we walked down the steps side by side, the irony of it struck me. The same stage where I'd once been denied a place had become the stage where life gave it back to me. That day, the lesson was clear. Some truths can't be taught with words, only with moments that break us first and rebuild us stronger. And for Benjamin, that moment had just begun. After the ceremony, the crowd slowly thinned out, leaving only echoes of laughter and the faint scent of perfume lingering in the air. I stood near the exit, still holding the plaque against my chest, unsure whether to stay or walk away. The applause was over, yet my heart still pounded, not from pride but from everything left unsaid. Benjamin lingered a few feet behind, his posture uncertain, as though he didn't know whether he was welcome to approach me. Mrs. Harper was already making her way toward the parking lot, her heels clicking like punctuation marks of disapproval. Brenda followed her, pausing only once to glance back. Benjamin didn't move. Finally, I turned to face him. The silence between us stretched, fragile and heavy. He tried to smile, but his lips trembled. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't even know where to begin." "You could start with hello," I replied, my tone calm but edged with ache. He nodded, staring down at the ground. "I'm so sorry. I didn't think." I finished for him, though there was no anger in my voice. "Didn't think your mother could belong in a room like this? Or didn't think she'd ever stand on a stage you thought was too good for her?" He winced. "I deserve that." I sighed, not to wound him but to release the years of silence I had carried. "Benjamin, I spent decades teaching you that worth doesn't come from money or titles. I thought you understood that." "I forgot," he said, his voice breaking. "When I started working with people like Brenda's family, You wanted to fit in," I said quietly. "You wanted to feel like you belonged. I know that feeling better than anyone." His eyes widened slightly, guilt flooding his face. "I hurt you." I nodded. "Yes, you did. But what hurts most isn't that you left me out. It's that you were ashamed of where you came from. Ashamed of me." He took a shaky breath. "I thought you'd embarrass me. But when I saw you on that stage today," he paused, tears forming, "you made everyone in that room proud. You made me proud. And I hated myself for realizing it too late." I reached out and placed a hand over his. His fingers were cold, trembling slightly. "Son, life has a strange way of teaching humility. It doesn't shout, it shows. And today it showed you." He looked up, eyes glistening. "Can you ever forgive me?" My throat tightened. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I said softly, Forgiveness isn't something I give to erase the past. It's something I give to free both of us from it. He blinked, tears spilling down his cheeks. You have every right to hate me. I don't hate you, I said firmly. You're my son. But I won't pretend what you did didn't break me. I watched your graduation on a screen, Benjamin. I heard you say I'd embarrass you. Do you know what that felt like? He shook his head, unable to answer. It felt, I continued, voice trembling, like the years I spent holding you through sickness, working through nights, and cheering through failures. All of it suddenly didn't matter. That day, I didn't lose an invitation to a ceremony. I lost my place in your heart. His shoulders shook. I'm so sorry, Mom. I let the silence rest between us for a long moment before I spoke again. You asked me to stay home so I wouldn't embarrass you, I said softly. But today life showed you who should really feel ashamed. He nodded, his face buried in his hands. I know. I see it now. I'm glad you do, I said gently. Because shame isn't meant to destroy you, it's meant to wake you up. We stood there, two people connected by blood and broken pride, trying to find the bridge back to love. Around us, the staff began dimming the lights, preparing to close the hall. Benjamin straightened, wiping his face. I don't deserve another chance, he whispered. But if you'd let me, I want to earn one. I looked at him. Not as the man in the suit, not as the graduate who'd chosen another family, but as the boy who once clung to my hand at the school gate. That boy was still somewhere inside him, waiting to come home. I gave a small nod. Come by tomorrow, I said quietly. No suits, no apologies. Just come. He looked at me with something between disbelief and relief. I will. As he walked away into the fading sunlight, I felt both emptied and full. Emptied of years of hurt, full of something softer, lighter. Not victory, not revenge. Just peace. Sometimes healing doesn't come from grand gestures or perfect apologies. It comes from standing in the truth, unshaken, and letting the other person see it. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without bitterness in my heart. Because the lesson had been learned, not just by him, but by me too. The next morning came with a quiet I hadn't felt in years. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, spilling across the worn wooden floor of my little living room. For the first time in a long while, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt still, calm, expectant. I made 2 cups of tea instead of 1. Somehow, I knew he would come. By mid-morning, a gentle knock echoed through the door. When I opened it, Benjamin stood there. No suit, no polished shoes, no air of self-importance. Just jeans, a wrinkled shirt, and tired eyes. The proud man I'd seen at his graduation was gone. What stood before me was my son. Hi, Mom, he said quietly, his voice carrying both hesitation and hope. I smiled faintly. You came. I said I would. He stepped inside, glancing around the familiar space as though seeing it for the first time. The sewing table still stood by the window. Spools of thread scattered like tiny bursts of color. The air smelled faintly of lavender and starch. Home unchanged. He touched the edge of the table, running his fingers along the fabric I'd been working on. I used to sit here while you sewed, he said softly. I'd play with the buttons. You always made a mess of them, I said, half smiling. He chuckled weakly. I remember. We sat down, the silence between us no longer sharp, just quiet, fragile. I handed him a cup of tea, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then he took a deep breath. I've thought a lot about what you said, he began. About how I forgot where I came from. His voice trembled. You were right. I let other people decide what mattered. I thought success would fix everything, make me someone worth admiring. But the truth is, the more I tried to prove myself, the smaller I felt. I listened, letting his words fill the room. He continued, that night after the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing you on that stage. How everyone was cheering for you. How proud you looked. And all I could think was, that's the woman who raised me. And I made her watch her own son's graduation from home. His voice cracked. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for that. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Benjamin, I said softly. Guilt only has power if you let it stay. What matters is what you do now. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. That's why I'm here. I want to do better. I want to know you again, not as the mother I took for granted, but as the woman I never took the time to understand. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. You don't need to start over, I said. You just need to show up and mean it. I will, he said firmly. Every week if you'll let me. And he did. Week after week he came. Sometimes he helped me sort fabric or deliver finished clothes to neighbors. Sometimes he just sat by the window, drinking tea while I worked. He began asking questions, not out of politeness but genuine curiosity. How do you make the stitching so even? How did you learn this pattern? Do you ever get tired? Little by little, we found our rhythm again. There was laughter, small talk, shared silences. He even started helping with the community sewing group I led every Saturday. Watching him mend torn uniforms and teach little kids how to thread a needle felt like witnessing a quiet miracle. One afternoon, after everyone had left, he turned to me. You know, Mom, he said, I think this is what you were trying to teach me all along. That worth isn't about who notices you. It's about who you lift up. I smiled, my heart swelling with quiet pride. Took you long enough to learn, I teased. He laughed, and for the first time in years, it sounded real, warm, boyish, familiar. Months passed. Brenda and Benjamin eventually parted ways. There was no big fight, just a slow fading of something built on the wrong kind of love. When he told me, I didn't say, I told you so. I simply hugged him and said, every ending makes room for something truer. In time, he found peace again, work he enjoyed, friends who saw him for who he was, not for who he was trying to be. And through it all, he kept showing up. Every Sunday, without fail, he'd knock on my door, 2 cups of tea in hand. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the rooftops, he said quietly, you know, Mom, when I was younger, I used to think you were ordinary. But now I see you're the strongest person I've ever known. I smiled faintly. Strength doesn't always roar, son. Sometimes it just keeps going. He looked at me for a long moment. I'm grateful you kept going, even when I didn't deserve you. I took his hand, holding it gently. I didn't forgive you because you deserved it, I said. I forgave you because I deserved peace. He nodded, eyes glassy with emotion. You've given me more than peace, Mom. You've given me a second chance. The evening breeze carried the scent of lilies from the small garden outside. The same flowers that once sat wilting on my table. Now they bloomed again, bright and full. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the fading sun touch my face. For years, I had carried the ache of being forgotten. But now, sitting beside my son, I understood something deeper. Love, when it survives humiliation and pride, doesn't return weaker. It returns purer. The road back to each other hadn't been easy, but it had been real. And sometimes, that's the best kind of redemption life can offer. Time has a gentle way of softening even the sharpest memories. It's been over a year since that ceremony, and when I look at Benjamin now, I see traces of the boy I once knew, wiser, humbler, and far more human. He still visits every Sunday, always bringing something small, a bag of fresh bread, a bouquet of lilies, or just that familiar smile I thought I'd lost forever. This morning, he helped me hang new curtains in the living room. As he reached for the rod, he laughed and said, Mom, I finally understand why you love doing things yourself. There's something peaceful about it. I smiled, because peace was something he used to rush past. Now he pauses to feel it. When he left for work, I stayed by the window, watching him wave before walking down the street. There was no bitterness left in me, only gratitude. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. Life had a strange way of writing its lessons. Sometimes cruelly, sometimes kindly, but always truthfully. I still remember that first phone call. The one that broke my heart. Stay home, Mom. You'll embarrass me. Those words once haunted me. Now they remind me of how far we've come. Because in the end, they weren't the end of our story. They were the turning point. Pain has a purpose. It strips away illusions, teaches humility, and reveals who we are when pride falls silent. For me, it showed that even in rejection, there can be redemption. And for Benjamin, it showed that love built on image will crumble, but love built on truth endures. Sometimes I sit on the porch at dusk with a cup of tea, the scent of lilies drifting through the air, and I whisper a quiet prayer. Not for things to change, but for things to stay just as they are. Peaceful, honest, real. I've learned that being a mother isn't about being perfect or adored. It's about loving without conditions, even when that love is tested. The world might forget women like me, but life doesn't. Life always remembers, and eventually, it finds a way to even the scales. If you've ever been hurt by someone you love, if you've ever felt unseen, unappreciated, or cast aside, take heart. Sometimes, the very moment that breaks you becomes the one that rebuilds you. And as for my son, well, life taught him, just as it once taught me. Pause, reflective tone. If stories like this touch your heart, stories of family, forgiveness, and the quiet strength that carries us through the years, subscribe to the channel. Because there are more stories like this one waiting to remind us that no pain is wasted, and no love, no matter how bruised, ever truly disappears.